Processed foods are totally evil.
Oh, so we just took a year-long break and came back, and this is what we're going to talk about, right?
Look, I just don't like to put anything processed in my body, okay?
Well, but your mouth is technically a food processor, kind of like that Vitamix in our counter, that one right there.
Hold on, the Vitamix is not natural.
Yeah, but think about it this way. Filtered water is processed and natural. And I saw you drink a cup of water in the morning.
Now you're just nitpicking. Dude, you're a dork.
And you're a nerd.
No, I'm a geek.
You mean Ketogeek?
God, what a bad dad joke. Cringiest ever. Come on.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. We probably lost half the subscribers that were still on board. But, Corey, let's do this.
Let's do this.
Welcome to the Ketogeek podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Well, welcome back to those who survived the cringiest joke of all time. And once again, we are back. Ketogeek is here to stay. My name is Fahad, and I am joined once again by
Corey.
Corey, the great man. And we together will be taking this podcast on a Segway tour and covering a very important topic that is just the cornerstone, the centerpiece actually, of the nutrition world. And we will parse it down. We're going to tear it down, go to the depths of it. But first of all, let us talk about who we are, Ketogeek. Corey, who are we?
We are Ketogeek. If you haven't heard of Ketogeek, you're living under a rock somewhere. Ketogeek started off with a goal in mind to create better foods for this world. And we have a low-carb lifestyle, and that was our basis. We had ghee, we had energy pods, and we're bringing all these things back. And we want to educate our listeners and our subscribers and create a beautiful community of boundless food intelligence.
Exactly. And our energy pods are these tiny little cups that we sell on our website at ketogeek.com. And right now they're out of stock, but there's some good news over here. So everybody who's been waiting for us to get back in stock, our ghee will come back this Thursday, July 1st. And then a week later from that, our chocolate fudge energy pods will come back, which is at July 8th. And watch out for them because all of this stuff is going to be limited stock. So get yourself ready and be prepared for the drop. And we will keep you guys posted more on all of our products in the future. Now, this is also something like this. Before we start or continue this podcast, people are going to be saying that, oh, you guys are already a processed food company. You are automatically supposed to be dismissed on this opinion, which is a good question right away before we even begin. So to that, I will say a very simple fact that you can't just dismiss an argument based on conflict of interest, which we technically have. If our goal is to create better foods for the future, for the world, for everybody else, then what that means and translates into is that it is more about the science and what we get out of it rather than our conflict of interest. So let's talk on the merits of argument and making this world a better place on reason, on science, and shun our dogmatic way of thinking. And we will give you guys a full-blown, balanced outlook on this. So as far as the products are concerned, they will be back very soon. I just gave you guys the dates, and soon we'll get a better roadmap of the future. We will plan to have a podcast every single week on Tuesdays, and we can touch a little bit on COVID, man. I think before we get into the process for the world, how have you been, Corey?
COVID was interesting. For some people, COVID was a major issue. You know what? That's an understatement. For most people, COVID was a major issue for our economy, for people's healths, for our society. It seems to have created a further divide, hasn't it?
Exactly. And We have been busy. We have been doing a lot of different things. We've had our ups and downs as well when it comes to the business. And COVID did put a big hamper on everything that we wanted to do. And we noticed from our suppliers and in distribution that the food chain is having a bit of a problem. Like there were so many shortages in foods, and behind the scenes, like even if you go to the grocery store, you just get a snapshot of what's going on. But behind the scenes, there's so many different dynamics in play, and COVID had a huge role in cutting down certain stock items or delaying certain shipments. And so everybody had to pull their weight up in order to make the world where we are today. And luckily right now, at least in California, the restrictions are laxed down. And if you have the vaccine on you, you can actually go out there without a mask. And so there's a lot of controversy. Everybody knows about these controversial issues. And our goal from now on is pick up the pieces and move onward and give you the best knowledge. You think that's a good way?
I think so.
All right. Corey, do you have anything else we can talk about before we delve into the actual episode?
I don't have anything I want to talk about, but for those of you who are listening, let's hear some comments on what you guys discovered through your experience during COVID.
Oh yeah, that would be really appreciated. While you're at it, leave a review on iTunes for this podcast. It means a lot to us, and leave us a review for our products too, wherever you find them. So these are the two things you guys can do to really support us and keep us motivated. We really, really depend on all our listeners and customers for taking this journey of bringing better foods and information your way. So please help us on this journey. Let's make this better world a better place. And so, Corey, let's begin our show and let's talk about processed foods.
Let's get into it. We need to let our audience know, what are processed foods?
Processed foods. The term gets thrown away so commonly in nutrition. It is absurd. It's to the point where I would argue that it's a cop-out, meaning that if you don't have, it's like you cannot really quantify this term. You can point fingers to it. You can say something is processed, but nowadays it's getting manipulated as a term because to dismiss somebody's argument or food product without focusing on the actual thing itself.
It seems like where we stand, it's become a black and white thing. And what Ketogeek is trying to do here is swim into the gray area a little bit and dive into the minutia of what processed foods actually are.
And above all, we need to figure out how we can improve them and make things work. But generally, if I were to say processed food, it's basically anything really that we consume is processed to some extent. Even your fruits and vegetables have to be treated, waxed, and potentially maybe even fumigated in order for them to hit the supply chain. Further, they come to your home and you process those foods as well. So it's just such a generalized word. And then another term that gets thrown around is the ultra processed foods, which are, some people have their own definition. And then there's the NOVA classification. We'll get into that in a little bit. But these are attempts that people have made, some in good intentions and some in greedy intentions, or just like a zealous intention to figure out what's going on over here. And the ultra processed, once again, I just think that we're having the wrong argument here. It's not about how much processing is done. The focus should be on how it impacts you and what is good, what is bad, what is agnostic towards your health goals or lifestyle, what works for you. For me, health is a jigsaw puzzle. It's your own jigsaw puzzle. Kind of like you play the game of Tetris, and you just got to line those things perfectly well and get the results out of it. And once you get that going, yeah, you can share others, but try to figure this out yourself.
And to that, I agree. It's like when you're going out to do some car shopping, for example. Not every single car is going to do every single job. You're going to want a truck to haul things. You're going to want a commuter to bring your family around. So it's just, there's some classifications here that we need to discuss about processed foods.
Bingo. Now, there are certainly problems within processed foods. And some of them could be that, there are issues with obesity and health that were not as prominent back in the good old days. I don't know what you mean by the good old days, but people love to just throw in like the past, 1800s, 1900s, whatever, man. Obesity was not as prominent then, but it is prominent now. We can't deny that. And we have to substantiate that certain foods, disregarding what the level of processing is, have contributed. But at the same time, we also have to realize it's a symphony, not just one food bad or one thing bad and so forth. But what do you think are some problems that are legitimately true about processed foods without getting into some of the myths that we will?
Some myths, people say processed foods right off the bat, they're not natural.
Yeah.
They're not being picked out of the ground. We're not throwing a spear into it. And, I just processed my food by throwing a spear into it. But you get the point there.
Yeah, and that's what everybody says, that it's just like everybody tries to point the exact finger to the processed foods, but they can't really say that's the exact point.
Exactly.
Because there's so many exceptions to those sort of principles of processing that you cannot really pinpoint. And we will get a little bit more into the whole topic itself. But yes, there's definitely problems with the processed foods, and in some regards, I would agree that this industry needs improvement. But what we don't need, I think, is labels, and what we do need is more quantification and understanding of how processed foods work. Let's focus on what the end result of the end product is.
Right. I think one of the problems that people get riled up about is when they cannot understand or pronounce the ingredients inside the packaged food item that they're picking up. A very simple one, for example, is sodium bicarbonate. People may know that as baking soda, but the word itself is very vague. Sodium bicarbonate. You'd have to have a little bit of chemistry know-how to know exactly what those things mean, but this is what we're looking to clarify for people, that sodium bicarbonate is baking soda, and we use that almost every day.
Yep. And going back to the unnatural point, I do see people's perspective on that as well, that previously, for thousands of years, we've had food that isn't in a plastic wrapper. These foods are not cooked in certain ways. They're not blended in a certain way as well. We didn't have these flashy flavors or looks that are novel to our time. So those are legitimate reasons to be sort of afraid of taking the next step forward. And we'll get into this whole debacle in just a little bit. But overall, I think that considering the current environment, it is totally fair to make a case against processed foods, food processing as a whole, and what is out there substantiates that even further. When you come across a news headline, when you come across a new study, or your favorite scientist going out there. But the thing is, there's a lot going on over here that is getting ignored and people aren't realizing. So let's start getting into some of the ways that this has been tried to be solved. One of the ways that one study recently actually came out last year, I think it was last year, and it talked about increased calorie intake because certain foods were more processed, comparing ultra-processed versus unprocessed foods. Now, in most people's, I don't know if you saw that. Did you hear about that study?
No, let's hear about it.
Okay, so that study had two different groups. I think there was a crossover study, and I wrote an article about it on Ketogeek about that study as well. And I think it was Kevin Hall's group. They did that randomized crossover or some study like that. And I did look at the sum of it, but I didn't go to the end and the depths of it because I disagreed with the premise of the study to begin with. And if you look at the study, it's not even per se ultra-processed versus unprocessed because, for example, in that study, they used hummus. And hummus you cannot make without literally shoving something into a device called food processor. So you can look at the study, but you also have to look at the practicality of those studies. You can make the best observation in the world, but if it's absolutely useless or detrimental or regressive, then what you've done is you've set us back. So I believe in science that pushes humanity forward. And you can calculate the amount of times, for example, a tree will fall down a day, how many trees will fall down a day. But if you cannot figure out how you can constructively use that to the benefit of mankind, what you've done is probably create more problems than solve. What you've created is potentially a conspiracy or a regressive way of thinking.
Right. And what I wanted to add into here is a good analogy. America got super good, and we're going to get way later into this way later in the podcast, but we got super good at industrial strength and power, and we created an industrial revolution, more or less. But a lot of the stuff that we did back then was potentially super deadly compared to what we have now. More safety regulations, more for manufacturing goods, and et cetera, et cetera. But we never threw that out into the space and never drove it into the sun to completely destroy industry, because we actually needed that. How come we can't see processed foods in the same light?
Yep. And this gets into a very ideological conflict beyond just the scientific study. Like, for example, if it's a food company, you look at, you can look at the conflict of interest. But when it comes to a scientist or a researcher or an intellect, what you need to look at is the conflict of ideology. What drives them? Because if they're untarnished by a certain person paying them or some monetary gains, you have to understand that there is something always driving somebody, and you have to excavate that in order to understand what's going on. And then if they literally, the only thing they use to dismiss your science or your reasoning is conflict of interest, you know it's not even about the science anymore. What you want to do is use an authoritative personality to dismiss an opposing point of view. That's what a lot of these people end up doing, which is sad, because I think that nutrition food and the food companies and all of us can work together to create better foods. That's at least my vision. But going back to that study that I was mentioning earlier, they used something called the NOVA classification. So you could literally wipe out the entire headline of the study and replace it by a test of the NOVA classification. That's basically what the study is. And we have the NOVA classification pulled up over here. So one of the concepts that we've talked about is black swans. Like, if you have a certain principle or a certain model that's out there, but if you figure out so many loopholes in that model, then you must, or you should at least have you should dismiss that model to begin with. And we're looking at the NOVA classification, which was used as the premise or precursor for that study that has been making rounds in bigger places like BBC and different places. And I understand where they're coming from. I mean, they want to put a finger on where the problem is. But what they end up doing is creating a flawed model that is... And we can totally get into it. And it's so vague, and it makes literally no sense. For example, we're looking at group 1 in the NOVA classification, which says what kind of foods are unprocessed or minimally processed. And they're talking about, for example, eggs. Now, Corey, what's the problem with eggs? Just straight up eggs?
Straight up eggs. How many people do you know eat straight up eggs raw? Who does that? I don't know a lot of people. Maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's one person I can name that I've heard of in my life that does this. But most of the time, we're going to put the eggs in a bowl, get a fork, blend them with that fork with the power of the human arm, salt it, put it into a... Oh my gosh, I know. What's happening?
Too much process.
Did this egg just move from group 1 to group 2?
I don't know.
It's not natural anymore.
I'm not part of NOVA classification.
So we like scrambled eggs, but that's a processed food. However, the perception is held that scrambled eggs are natural because they're less processed, and therefore it makes them better. But nobody can answer in what way.
What if I blend eggs with sugarcane water?
Oh, now we're getting hard and like scary. We're adding too much energy into this thing. Like
but here's the thing. That could literally pass off as less processed than scrambled eggs.
It could.
Yeah. That makes no sense.
Into a raw egg, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, you put a raw egg with sugarcane juice.
Yep.
And this is practically minimally or unprocessed.
Just
based on these guys.
And stir very gently, of course. No, Not too much processing.
I don't know. They haven't even specified that.
No, they haven't. That's one of the problems with this.
Yeah. So we just picked on one food, and think about what you can do with all the other different kinds of foods as well. And then it's just, oh my God, edible parts of fruits, leaves, stems. So the problem is it falls into sort of this naturalist fallacy where the more closer you are to nature, the better it is. But we know from basic food science that the more closer you are to nature, you're also creating more foodborne illnesses, and you're also creating foods that are not shelf stable. They have limited open space life, and they may be prone to bacterial degradation under the most natural environments. That's why we use all these food processes to begin with.
Right. And there was one point in time, potatoes were pretty much poisonous and deadly. And to an extent, if you leave them in your cupboard for too long and they become green, that's the potato generating a defense. They're creating toxins in order for them to not be eaten, not be desirable anymore, and so they can reproduce. So they're basically enacting their natural defenses.
Yep. And then in group 1, we're looking right now, they're just offering certain definitions. And let's go to group 2, which is the processed culinary ingredients. Apparently, that's different from processed foods in their definition. And it says butter, lard, sugar, including oils. So, I mean, it's all over the place.
I think it's important to note what their classification here is. So they take group 1 foods, which are basically just picked out of nature, and group 2 gets added on. Basically, group 2 foods are created from group 1 foods by processes such as pressing, refining, grinding, milling, and drying. So they're in, I guess, on the NOVA classification, it's a lightly processed food.
Okay, that's according to them. So see, all of this looks so good in theory, and when you're working in a lab environment to tease out your own ideology, like the processed foods are evil, you can tease out the ideology pretty easily with this model. But in actuality, just the example of the egg is enough to dismiss the entire classification model. Next, we go to group 3, which is the processed foods, which include bottled vegetables or legumes, preserved in brine, whole fruits and syrups, tinned fish, preserved in oil. So all of these canned goods, basically.
So it seems like we're moving into preserved foods at this point.
We're moving into various different domains, which really are all over the place.
Right.
And I mean, from a food structure perspective, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it literally makes very little to no sense.
Right.
I mean, I understand more processing is evil. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're trying to tease out. But besides that, I mean, I'm not seeing any concrete evidence. Like, there's literally no evidence. Like, why is X food worse than Y food? But we do have isolated studies which kind of dismiss all of this in one go because we know the science. It's more exact. It's more precise. So this is the group 3. You guys can totally check out the NOVA classification online. Just Google it up. And there it is. Most are highly palatable. And now we're getting into the palatability sort of thing.
Yeah, are processed foods addictive?
Yep, that's going to be another interesting topic. And we're going to deal with it. Right now, we're acknowledging the criticisms that are being brought over here, which, like I said, we do kind of agree with the problem to a large extent. We just don't agree with the method they're using to solve it. And the kind of deductions that they're coming up with are just absurd. That's my contention. But I do agree that there is a problem. Now we have the group 4, the demonized ultra-processed foods ones, which everybody thinks is straight up poison and evil. So look at the first one. Like, it says carbonated soft drinks are ultra processed products. Now here's the problem with that. You can consume 0-calorie diet soda, for example, which would be considered ultra processed under this NOVA classification. But think about it this way. Think hard and deep about it. would you take from a scientific perspective, knowing that we have the science on all of this? Which would you pick to drink? Would you pick to drink a 0-calorie soda that's inside a can, properly stowed by human intervention, or would you drink a sugarcane juice, which does have calories and lots of sugar in it, and is infested with microbes by like a few hours in being left on your shelf? So that's the question. Like, why you're missing out the mechanics here? So if your model doesn't factor in these loopholes, then what you're left with is just BS, man.
Right.
It's like a naturalist fallacy in this. And then they're talking about pre-prepared meats, cheese, pasta, pizza dishes, poultry, fish nuggets, and stick sausages, burgers, hot dogs, reconstituted meat products. So in other words, ultra-processed foods are all the foods that are used and made by food companies. And all the unprocessed foods are basically foods that are made by the farmer. So it's basically saying that food companies are evil. They are these greedy little companies that are all in for the money. And at the same time, the unprocessed, all these people are just good people because, nature is superior.
It's natural.
It's literally the same mindset that has enveloped itself into the realms of science.
We have to remind ourselves that, nature is good. Nature can also be deadly. We forget that there's good stuff like organic cheese. Sure, it's a processed thing, but it's got organic. It wasn't produced with as many chemicals and toxins and yada yada yada. Organic segueing, I do like the sustainability of it. At least people who do practice sustainability and giving back to the environment and working with it on a scientific basis. That's really cool. However, it doesn't. This whole classification is just basically saying what these things are, and it feels to me like they just put a bunch of things into some hats and selected them and said, "Okay, this is a processed food and it's evil."
Yep, and we can further see flavor enhancers, colors, emulsifiers, sweeteners, thickeners, foaming agent, bulking, carbonating, gelling, glazing agents. All of these agents that people like myself can recognize and know how they function. In fact, I could find certain studies based on positive health benefits of these things and how processed foods can benefit from them. Like there are certain foams and certain drinks that are very satiating and filling and reduce energy intake. But this lumping, this absurd lumping they're doing and then teasing out that ultra processed foods are evil, you're basically throwing all of that into the trash.
Right.
Because you think that natural is better. That's basically what this classification boils down to. That's the problem.
The natural is better gets trumped as soon as I say, well, let's go ahead and hold a rod of plutonium in your hand. That's kind of natural, isn't it? You can find plutonium in the earth.
And, another big problem now is that now we have the vegan meats or cell culture, cell-made meats, cell-based. And these kind of models are stuck in the past, like literally stuck in the past. They don't factor in these kind of studies. Like, for example, if vegan meat, which there was a study, it was a very bad study, by the way, vegan meat was more satiating than, for example, your regular meat. And so if you come up with a study like, even if you disagree with that study, but what if you do come up with a study like that where the ultra-processed food is superior than unprocessed, so-called, in quotation, unprocessed foods, then what about that? How does this model factor that into it? It doesn't.
No.
That's the problem. And then another problem here is that everybody touts about ultra-processed foods being bad, but then there are certain interventional studies that have been done in controlled environments where low-calorie ultra-processed foods were used to reduce weight. And during the period of the study, people did lose absurd amount of weight, and they made progress. And then as soon as the intervention was over, then people started gaining weight. So could you make the same argument here that it is going away from ultra-processed foods that caused that weight gain after the intervention?
See, I like that approach. They took something, they took a certain science and a technology and wanted to understand it even more and they had an end goal in mind. Let's help these people lose weight by helping them feel more full while getting enough nutrients to continue their bodily functions. No, that's pretty cool. That's an advancement in my mind, and especially if the food is healthy for you. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Remember when we went to our nut supplier and the guy, he went on a zero calorie.
Air diet.
I've made some zero calorie foods, but they weren't zero calorie per se. But anyway, the person over there, he was the manager, and he went on that sort of low calorie diet, and you noticed how he actually lost weight over time.
Right.
So there's that. I mean, it can work. And basically the problem with nutrition science is all of these interventions about obesity and diet, they work for a short period of time, like 6 months, probably a year, or whatever it is. But over time, everybody ends up gaining the weight back.
Yeah, not a practical lifestyle, in my opinion.
Not for the public.
Yeah.
Not for the public at all. And the public, what they want is tasty, cheap, convenient, and available foods. That's the demand. And you have to make the demand count. So you need better science over here and a more educated consumer. So there's many things that can be done over here, and perhaps that could be a topic of a future podcast as well. But I think this can be a great segue into some of the myths about the processed foods, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just start with processed foods aren't nutrient dense. Oh, come on.
Oh man, this is my favorite one. The most nutrient dense foods by proxy and definition are processed and ultra processed is the most.
Agreed.
Example, multivitamin pill.
Right. Or Snickers bar.
Yeah.
That's very, very energy packed.
Yeah. It's just like, these are by far the most processed, the most nutrient dense foods. I mean, what kind of nutrients are you talking about? You can literally use processing to isolate that nutrient into a compact form. Talk about the supplement industry.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a very, very weak argument, and it gets thrown around by naturalist people a lot of the times. You can, if you want fat, you can literally extract oil out. If you want carbohydrates, you can get sugar crystals and syrups. If you want protein, you have protein isolates. You want to combine all of them? You can combine all of them. You're short on fiber? You can isolate fiber out of here. So, I mean, this whole argument of nutrient density, honestly, like I said, the most nutrient-dense foods are processed and ultra-processed foods.
Agreed. And when you see those things that are touted as health foods on shelves, they're packed full of antioxidants. Well, how do you think they got so many antioxidants in there? They extracted it.
Okay, and let's talk about nutrient density by formula and mathematics, which is the amount of nutrients per certain volume or mass, or volume more than likely, because density is associated is done with volume. So let's get a little technical. Let's say you have kale, right? And you think that's super uber nutrient dense.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Now heat it up and turn it into a fine powder. You've added processing to it, and it's more nutrient dense. It's literally the same thing.
And possibly more bioavailable.
Possibly more bioavailable because you've disrupted the cells inside in the plant structure.
Right.
So, I mean, these are just that's a very bad criticism. So the bottom line is you can find whatever nutrient you're looking for in any form in processed foods. So that is a very moot point. What else we got, man?
Well, a lot of people also talk about these processed foods having way too much energy, which there's a little bit of merit to this. We do see some stuff on the market, like I'll use the Twinkie, for example. The Twinkie is full of hydrogenated oils, so there's your fats for your energy. It's also full of sugar, usually in the form of high fructose corn syrup, which is a very, very, very dense form of energy. The Twinkie has a lot of energy, but Twinkie might have an application in our lives.
Yes, and the fact that you say that there's too much energy literally substantiates our last point, that they are nutrient dense in that regard. If you're worried about high energy, I mean, I thought that fat protein sources were technically nutrients, but I guess people think otherwise, right? Well, I don't know what they're thinking, I guess. But I mean, there is a legitimate concern if you step back and look at it, yes, these foods do have a lot of energy in them. And the amount of energy that can get into your body without making you feel full, which is the problem.
That is the problem.
That is the heart of the problem. There are foods there.
Now, we can envelop this last point that they have too much energy, that there is an issue that they can be addictive because they are delicious. But we can talk about a little bit about that and a little thing called sensory-specific satiety, and may cause overeating. Yeah. And we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, but just to rally a little bit more on the last too much energy point, there are foods, there are options of low calorie, very low calorie, 0 calorie processed foods that are very filling, and they are perfectly fine. And so you have options. You don't have to take everything at face value and be afraid of it. Delve into the Pandora's box. You are a smart customer.
Let's crack open the box a little bit, and let's share with the guests one food item that we find that is good for us and is processed and is filling and has enough nutrients in it. I'll use my first example. One of my favorite processed foods on this planet is 0 fat protein yogurt.
I was going to say ground beef.
Oh, ground beef is amazing.
Honestly, any sort of meat product, and even if it is jerky or something like that, I'm totally going to go for it. And nuts are freaking amazing, man. Nuts are amazing. And just to throw a slight plug in here, when I was doing the energy pods plus meat and some other extra stuff just on the side diet, which we at one point called nutty carnivore. I was at my leanest.
Yeah.
So there's that. So energy pods, I love those. In fact, that was the major reason why I created them, because I wanted to have something that I could consume while I was working 12 hours, 8 hours a day. And I didn't want to feel hungry and just enjoy what I was eating. So, but you brought up a very good point in a minute or two ago, which was that sensory-specific satiety and people claiming that processed foods can be addictive and cause overeating. I mean, that's a legitimate concern. You will hear that in many videos where people will say, I just can't stop eating. I just can't stop eating this food. But there are some interesting dynamics here. For instance, when you don't eat something for a large period of time and it's tasty, you're going to eat a lot of it anyway.
Right.
Whether it's strawberries, whether it is bacon, whether it is ice cream, whether it is steak. I mean, you tried that vegetarian experiment and you just destroyed steak after that for a few days.
Sure did, yes. Coming off a vegetarian and then going into a brand new food that was really tasty, I ate a lot of it.
Yep. So that's a normal thing. Let's not say that's bad that you eat a lot of food. Food's supposed to sustain you, for God's sake, and make you feel good. It is one of the most beautiful experiences of life. So let's step back a little bit, can we? I mean, there's a line between addictive compulsion and something being tasty and enjoying it, and which sustains you. So, and going to the sensory-specific satiety again, we know from studies that when you eat the same thing over and over again, over time, you start to not like them, or you stop eating them, or you just hate them straight up.
Yeah.
For example, if you have tasty croissants, then you will eat them for a small period of time. You'll binge on them, perhaps, maybe. And then over time, you just stop eating them.
Lose their appeal.
You stop. Yeah, exactly. It's been proven scientifically, and studies are available for this concept called sensory-specific satiety. Now, if you change flavors, then you can probably perhaps eat a little bit more round. But the bottom line here is that you can't say that about one food item. Once again, it goes back to the whole jigsaw, puzzle, and symphony sort of way of thinking. And if you do have an issue where you can't stop eating the same food item, then there might be a problem that no diet may be able to fix, and you might need some help.
Right.
So there's that. What we're talking about is the scientific and sometimes anecdotal perspective of all of these things. We are not talking about rare exceptions to the rule. You may be a rare exception to the rule, but you may not qualify for, you may not be the generalization. We cannot use your example to generalize.
Right.
I was reading one article recently, and it said processed foods cause mood swings. Does happiness consider mood swings?
I don't think people would associate the happiness being a bad thing. Right?
Okay.
But we can define mood swing, swinging one mood to the next in a very, very, very short period of time. I don't know. I don't have any personal experience to really speak on this. As a child, I did eat what would be considered an ultra-processed food diet, which was essentially for breakfast. It was either a choice of cereal, Eggo waffles, or Pop-Tarts. Gosh, I just plugged some products, and now we need to replug Ketogeek again. But anywho, yeah, you move on to lunch, and then you move on to dinner, and generally I ate the same stuff, but I can't really put a finger on whether those things cause mood swings or not.
Yeah. I mean, those foods were not the best, let's just put it that way. But
yeah,
the mood swing thing, the problem is when I was looking at the article where I got this point where it said mood swings could happen, the problem was that they used this an associative study. It was an observational analysis. It didn't say that for sure mood swings are going to happen. And the problem with observational studies is that they're very weak when it comes to how much you can depend on them for the value of their evidence is rather weak in those regards. Anybody can tease out mechanisms. So the whole mood swings thing, and perhaps you could be having a bad day with your wife or husband or family, and that could be a much bigger player than processed foods itself.
And who hasn't woken up on the wrong side of the bed? Like, just wake up feeling like you're pissed at the world. I mean, I'm pretty sure every human has experienced that once. And perhaps these mood swings can be attributed to ultra-processed foods having quite a bit of energy in there. And Twinkies, who have you ever seen eat slowly with a fork and a knife? You just shove that thing right in your mouth.
Yeah.
You can see that creating a really big up spike in your blood sugar, which possibly increases your feeling of energy and energeticness. And then literally an hour later, you're going to come down and crash, and you're going to feel tired and muggy and la.
And there could be so many reasons as to why the mood swing could be happening. Perhaps it's because you're not getting enough of the other nutrients that are required. Or perhaps it is also in line with a lack of physical activity or some sort of other lifestyle choices.
Like an energy overload almost.
Yeah. So in those cases, you think about it this way. You are eating Twinkies, you're not going working out, you are getting a little lazier in some ways, perhaps, maybe, or you may be being shouted at by your boss that day. And so all of these things are cumulatively adding up, and you realize that, you don't realize actually that there are other factors that are in play. So you can't really create a strong causation over here. Now, that's not saying it's false. It's just saying that the evidence is rather weak or non-existent.
Yeah, it's a single pointed attack, and what we want to do is a multiple point attack on the question.
So, but if you have your nutrients in balance and everything's going well, then, I mean, I think that should be totally fine. Next up, what do we got, man?
Oh, let's talk about processed oils. Ultra-processed foods are loaded with processed oils, and they get the name ultra-processed because something that is already processed is going into something that will be processed further.
I think there's some credibility there because some of these foods are freaking loaded with oils.
Yeah.
It's disgusting and nauseating.
You can get exactly. And if you've ever had a really, really, really cheap let's use a pizza, for example, and you go ahead and reheat it in the oven, all the oils leach out. That's pretty nasty. Another problem with processed oils is that maybe that they're a bit hydrogenated. Not hydrogenated, sorry, oxidized. There's the word I was grasping for.
Yep, that could be an issue, and I've had a little bit of a back and forth with some of my low carb people on this regards. And though they raise good concerns, I'm just not convinced on the evidence in humans in this regard. Like, there are mechanistic evidence regarding certain processed oils being bad, but once you zoom out, I'm just not convinced by certain oils being bad in certain ways. So the human trials is where you need to start seeing the results. So, for example, when you do science, you just don't look at a rodent study or you look at a cell culture. You have to draw the entire picture. You have to go all the way from the bottom, a cell culture, or to probably rodent models. And then you have to go further up into human trials. You do observational studies, even further higher level. So these are multiple ways you can go up and down the chain of studies and figure out what is going on. And I'm just seeing a broken chain link when it comes to certain processed oils, especially at the level of human intervention, which isn't as strong or convincing. Could there be evidence? Yes, but there's also contrary evidence why fat or processed oils might be totally fine or good. And it also depends on how much you're drinking. Is it a tablespoon or a teaspoon, or are you consuming just pounds and pounds of butter and oils and all these different things? So it all depends.
Right.
So this is more of a statement than some sort of a problem.
And there's a bit of a fallacy. The people who will tout that natural foods are better for you are going to be the ones that are going to be doing the most home cooking. They're not going to be they're not going to purchase processed foods. Instead, they're going to process at home. So when let's go back to the example of processed oil. You get your organic avocado oil from Whole Foods for $20 for 18 ounces of it, or 16, whatever it is. And then you right away put that into a pan and heat it up. That's kind of processing it and bringing it into the ultra processed realm.
Yep. Everything's processed.
You cannot escape. You have teeth. Oh,
It
no.
is inevitable. Your stomach is a food processor that does chemical and mechanical processing inside your body.
Right.
What else we got?
I think we can move along to our next point, which Fahad just pulled up one of my favorite photos that I've ever seen online. And the myth is the label of a packaged food or ultra processed food or processed food, whatever, is like a chemistry book, which is, yeah, it's correct. You have chemicals in there that don't have common names.
Well, food is chemicals, brah.
Oh, yeah, we're made of chemicals.
We are made of chemicals. Perhaps. I mean, I understand where they're coming from at the same time.
Right.
Like, people, when they look at a label, they're like, what does this sodium blah, blah, blah do? Or this E number blah, blah, blah do?
Right.
And it is an easier path to... The naturalist path is the easiest path to take, because you think just because their ancestors have been eating like this for 10, 15,000 years, or people in the Battle of Gallipoli have been eating like this, or the what is it called, the Vikings, or anybody you can pick on the past, like the Spartans have been eating a certain way. You can make the argument, look, they look so good. Well, the thing is, we don't know for sure if they look that good. Those evidences are rather weak, and we don't know if they actually were just giving them chump change food or actually really good food. Right. So there's a lot of nuance involved. Let's talk about what's here and now. So there is some legitimate concern that modern food lists are huge and humongous, but the truth is that everything is a chemical. And once we did a poll on our Ketogeek Instagram post with this all natural egg. This is a picture that we have pulled up in front of us, and it shows all the chemicals that are part of or inside an egg. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times when people say, look, the ingredient list on this bar is just egg and fruit or something like that, what they don't see is that egg is composed of aqua, water, I'm reading now, and then certain amino acids like glutamic acid, aspartic acid, valine, arginine, leucine, lysine, serine.
Well, pump the brakes. Acid in the egg. Hold on.
Acid, what?
Wait, that burns things.
That kills things. What? What about the hexadecanoic acid?
Butcher those words.
I haven't taken chemistry in a while, man. What's funny is that when I was doing, side note for guys and gals who was listening, I was working on this little app that is still pending where I pulled down tens and tens of thousands of different chemicals and foods. And so I know what many of these things do, even if my pronunciation is extremely terrible. And sometimes we don't know what they're doing. Most of the time we don't know what they're doing.
And there's even color in the eggs. And so you have colors like E160C, E160A, E306, E101. Now, those are classifications of a certain chemical that produces a certain pigment. It's just easier to identify rather than looking at it and going, that's egg color.
And what is important to note over here is that a lot of the times when you get packaged foods, what they end up doing is they'll take these very same chemicals and they'll isolate them, and then they will put them into a certain protein bar or a chocolate bar or some of these products that are out there. And so that's what happens most of the time. A lot of the times these chemicals are isolated, they're tested in certain models, especially rodent models, and then they're brought into the human food chain. So that's what ends up happening most of the time. So you might have, so you think that long list behind the back is something that you're not used to. You probably are eating that already in a certain food that you might be considering as whole or natural.
Well, if you have any fears of how the labels look like a chemistry book, God forbid you ever look at a chemistry list of what's in the body.
Yeah. That's
what you're made of.
Exactly. So I think the best solution here is to lead with a question. Like, what do they do? And it's a beautiful experience because now you are literally playing Tetris with chemicals. You're trying to figure out, oh, look, what does tyrosine do, for example? Perhaps you could do that with your family or children or anybody. Like, this could promote a really interesting family of chemists or chemistry-minded people where you talk about, hey, what do you think this chemical, why is this egg yellow, for example, at our table? Or why is this certain cereal so hard and structured? Like, these are the questions you can start asking. And you know what the best part is? The next generation of people that grow up with this sort of mindset will be very educated consumers and science chasers. So if you can do that, you're already ahead of the game. You're a smart consumer, and we need more people like you. Lead with questions, lead with understanding, and because that's how we learned a lot of these things.
Yeah, there's something there is to be said about accumulating knowledge, and I feel like if you accumulate knowledge in this stuff, your chemical anxiety will vanish.
Yep. So yes, every food item is basically filled with chemicals, even if it's one ingredient. In the ingredient list, it is composed primarily of tens of thousands of chemicals.
Yep.
Oh, man. What's up next?
Next, we have processed foods sabotage your sleep.
That was on another post. Like, these pointers, I just Googled up that what are the bad things about processed foods, for example. And these articles just keep popping out. And, oh, my God, it's just so crazy. Sabotage your sleep. All right. They did, from what I can recall, it was once again an associative study where, you could literally take anything and say that it can sabotage your sleep if you really want to look hard enough. And that is just how they're...
Yeah, it could be due to what processed food you used to sabotage your sleep. Like, you are not going to drink, hopefully you do not drink coffee right before bedtime. Like, that will sabotage your sleep, and that's a processed food doing just that.
Yep. So all the low carbers who are here with us throughout this entire journey who know now that association does not equate to causation and why fat was considered evil, you have to apply the same over here as well. You can't just say associative stuff in processed foods is bad. You can't say all processed foods are bad either. You cannot generalize here. And the worst thing you can do is have a naturalist fallacy in the name of Nova classification, which is, I'm finding it hard to believe you call it science. But, I'll give them credit. They're trying to do something different. They're trying to locate the problem. I'll give them credit for that. But whether I agree with them, I really don't. So, and the fact that they don't want to, like, there have been times where I've engaged with these people And I have not received much response from them. They really think food companies are evil. In fact, there was this one writer from New York Post, and that person, I said, you could come onto our podcast and we could have a constructive discussion. And they said that because you're a food company, we're not going to do the podcast with you.
Interesting.
So you guys have to realize as listeners, we want to do good. We want to try what we can, but you have to realize of the opposing side is not, a lot of the times they're not willing to work with us as well. They don't want to create better foods for the future as well. So that was just a bit of a side segue, and we'll get into the bigger picture at the close of the podcast. But let's continue onward. The whole sabotaging your sleep. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So processed foods are evil because they're created by humans. Holy moly.
Perhaps we can also make the same argument about
everything.
And houses, cars. But I don't put it in my body. Well, what about filtered water? That's pretty processed. So
we're like, in my opinion, humans will see something in the nature that sort of works, and then we try to mimic it. And then once we mimic, we improve the hell out of it. And the reason why we started filtering our water is because we realized that the earth can actually filter the water down to a microbial level, and it gets stored in aquifers really deep in the planet. And these are water droplets that have been going through lots and lots of soils, sediments, sand, rocks, you name it. The water went through it and it was purified. And we got inspired by that and said, well, let's do a better job than what nature can do and isolate dihydrogen monoxide.
Without all the potential for microbes and certain worms that can get inside your body.
Right.
That was a good idea.
Amazing idea. I really do not want pests and creatures floating around my body and parasites. No, thank you.
Well, one of the reasons why people blame it on the humans is because everybody blames it on the humans in every industry, basically. And the common criticism that comes over here is that humans are driven by greed. And greed is going to be the primary reason why, like, that's why they say they dismiss all the scientific studies that come from certain food companies or certain food organizations, which, seriously, nutrition science is just freaking weak, man. You shouldn't really... don't use it for your own agenda. I mean, just be very careful about it. It's not the best science. It's a lot of statistical analysis that can be misleading. So be careful about that just in general. Yeah. Now, as far as the greed is concerned, tell me one place where you can justifiably say that people are not making money. Everybody has to make money. And so I think it's just a drive towards... capitalism, like an anti-capitalist sort of thing, I guess. I'm trying to figure out what's going on over here, as in, there is some legitimate reasons. There are people who would be willing to just make money and ignore people's health. But this doesn't mean you should throw away processed food. This should mean that you should push the researchers and writers and everybody else around you that we need to better understand processed foods and we need to improve them.
Right. Not to which side I agree. And I feel like if there was actually malicious intent by these food companies to kill people off in the droves, that would have already been done.
Yep. I don't think that most people are that bad. And when we went to the fancy food show in San Francisco, and we've been to nutrition and food events, both of them.
Yeah.
And we've seen that nutrition science usually creates the trend. Unless you're a big company, like, for example, Coke or Coca-Cola, then you will be the one just creating waves and waves of new products and trends. But if you're a small to medium-sized business, you really have to rely on the public and the trends that are out there to even start your business. Like our Ketogeek, it started because of the very same
Because
thing.
of a trend.
Yes, exactly. And we were curious about it. Now, we've kind of segued a little bit away, but that's how we began when it comes to our business. So the food companies are just way too busy trying to survive with their low profit margins. And yes, they really sometimes have very low profit margins. Like for us at Ketogeek, we have very low. People are, your products are so expensive. But we just recently did a side-by-side comparison with a cookie versus an energy pod. A cookie was like 7 cents or something to make, and then the energy pods are like $1 or so. It's just absurd how much almond flour and some of these things cost. So, I mean, we want to give things away as much as possible, but we gotta sleep and put a bed underneath us, you know?
That's right.
So that's the thing, that it is not always the food company. And if you look at who develops these recipes, it's the food writers that come up with this crazy, delicious, chewy chocolate chip cookie. And then somebody decides to just basically monetize that and industrialize that. That's what ends up happening a lot of the times. And the consumers consume that.
Right. And a lot of I feel like a lot of the time people start these companies because they discovered something they really enjoy and they want to share it. They have a passion. I'll use Fahad for an example. The energy pods exist because he wanted something for his long work days. This is literally a selfish thing he created, but then he's like, oh, shoot, I can just keep on making lots of these and share them with the world.
And get people the results that I got.
Right.
So that was my journey, and that's been the journey for Ketogeek as a whole, I would argue. That we're always trying to create something better and trying to reevaluate what's going on around us. And if our product is out there, we want to show people how you can use it towards your goals. So humans, I swear I can literally do a new podcast about just human behavior.
We can go wild on that one, can't we?
Yeah. So, but for now, I think we're at a good point where we've argued both for and against what people are saying over here.
Right.
And so the next thing we can talk about is they're too cheap, easy, and convenient.
They're easy to get. They're really easy to eat. There's even some merit to how easily the structure of the food gets destroyed in your mouth and then what that looks like inside your body as it's absorbed. You can even say that this is a question of it's too easily absorbed.
Yeah, that's the whole food structure thing, man.
Right.
Like there are foods that you may think they're going to be really, really making you feel full, but they end up just not making you feel full.
When you look at a ball of cotton candy and it's just voluminous, it's huge, it's massive, and then you hydrolyze it, it becomes like the size of a dime.
Yeah, that's a very good example, and people really need to look at this very, very, like, this is an important point. That's a very, very powerful point. Like, a lot of the people in nutrition think that food volume has a huge role to play in how full you feel. That's why they create these certain foams, or that's why they create these certain soups. But if you really look at this, look at how the cotton candy, which has huge volume, but still you feel hungry within a small period of time, that speaks miles about how food structure plays a huge role in how full you will feel. Cotton candy is not filling, period, at all. But its volume is huge. It's like you're eating someone's head, something as big as someone's head, and you're still hungry.
Clouds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this should put a pause to everybody when it comes to thinking, like, this is fantastic.
Take a moment and listeners, pause and think about the things that you eat at home and think about those things that make you full versus not full. And maybe just starting there, you'll surprise yourself with how many foods you eat that are, say, like satiating versus how many are not satiating. You could probably start with that if you're trying to leverage your goals towards weight loss, or if you're just trying to recomp your body. Start with that. That's a very, very good start point. So,
by the way, I just wanted to add a little bit of tiny more example here.
Yeah.
Water is also a great example for that. So water has high volume, but most of the interventions that I've seen really don't make a huge difference with water when it comes to energy intake. So it's not that strong. So the volume thing is just moot. It depends on what it is rather than the volume of what it is.
Right.
So, yeah, man. And as far as being so easy to find and eat, I would argue that, I understand where, once again, I'm going to first acknowledge what the criticism is. The criticism here is that they are available anywhere. And you could go to a vending machine, you could go to a gas station, you could go to your friend's house, and you can start munching away food anytime, anywhere. And so that is considered problematic because, you know...
It's kind of funny that's a problem now.
I'm trying to find it hard to justify that as well. I'm saying all of this.
We used to have to worry about, as a human species, we worried about winter because that meant our food was not going to grow. That if we can't grow food, then we can't feed our cattle. And if we don't have cattle producing more cattle, we can starve in winter. We don't really have that issue anymore, though.
Yeah, people don't realize how stellar the U.S. food system is.
Right.
Yeah, and the fact that we withered through COVID like that, holy moly. To all the farmers, drivers, to anybody who's played a role, including the people that went to work, you guys are champs, man.
Yep. Thank you so much for going back to work. If you did, that is amazing. The COVID thing, absolutely frightening. It's an unknown. We don't know what's going on, but we had enough knowledge to continue working together safely. And I'd have to say that it's a success. We moved through COVID and humanity did a good job.
Bingo. Nailed it. So I would say, and I think we both would agree on this, that having food accessible, easily available whenever you're hungry is a good thing.
Right. And how many of you used DoorDash through COVID? Let's go. A lot of you probably did.
Probably.
I did once.
Yep, DoorDash. And there's an Instacart as well. There's a few of them now. So, I mean, we live in a good time. I mean, those are expensive services, but you got to do what you got to do.
Exactly.
Next one is it increases your sodium levels. And as you guys know, it can.
Yes.
Can you name certain foods that are very high in sodium?
Yeah, you can eat quite a bit of jerky and then just be extremely thirsty and also sick of salty things.
Yeah. Try overdoing the salt and you'll be like done with salt.
I don't think you'll be able to consume enough salt before it becomes dangerous, unless you're actually sadistic and masochistic towards yourself and you want to torture yourself with a salted tongue. Gosh.
And some of the people in our low carb and keto community, and I don't like, this is one topic, that sodium one, I am not super strong on, but we've had people who are literally selling salt right now to people and electrolytes, and they seem to be doing totally fine.
Yeah.
And as far as the science behind is concerned, I mean, I'm just not super convinced about the sodium level science at the moment. So, but perhaps this could be a legitimate concern. But as far as the keto and low carb is concerned, it's the salt requirements are actually higher than normal. So there's that because of potential electrolyte depletion. Mm-hmm. So I'm not too worried about personally about the sodium levels.
Yeah, it kind of acts just like your fats and your carbohydrates. They act on levers. Your salts can also be lever as well. Body does need salts. We do know that.
And we are on to the next one, which is they are too colorful and manipulative.
Oh no.
Well, have you looked at the Rolls-Royce?
Yeah, it's a beautiful vehicle.
Have you looked at your clothes, readers and listeners?
We look really good.
Yeah, we look good. And what makes them really fancy and pop out?
Those wonderful, exciting colors.
Yes, it's the design, it's the color, it's all of those things that make things pleasing to your eyes.
How do things in nature attract one another to mate?
Well, first of all, I look at the person.
You look at the person.
Yeah.
If they have a good sense of style, you get interested. So,
and then you start talking.
Exactly.
So, I mean, there's that. And just like with every pointer, the concern here is that they use marketing terms and certain colors in foods that may be harmful potentially, or those they might be more interested in marketing and selling the product than the actual caring about the health of the people, which is a legitimate concern, and which is something that we have an issue with as well. There are times when you get certain notes from people like celebrities or influencers. And the first question is, how many followers can you distribute your product to, or how many views? So it's not about how many people you can make healthy. It's more about how much you can market. So, I mean, I don't have personally issues with marketing because that's how people find your product. But the conversation about health in food products needs to be brought in, for sure. But not by dismissing, but by understanding.
Well, let's make a direct comparison. So you have these ultra-processed foods. I'm going to use fruit by the foot, for example, especially their rainbow color, where they have like 7 different colors in that thing. It's really sweet. It has a fun texture to chew on, et cetera, et cetera. We would consider that, because of its color, it's manipulating us. What about when you go and dine at the French Laundry? Look at that plate.
You mean like news? I'm just kidding. I'm just getting political. No, I'm just messing around.
That plate is full of beautiful and colorful, delicious looking food. Is that manipulative? No, because I chose to go to the French Laundry and I paid $600 to sit here. Well, you were a little bit manipulated by people's Instagram posts and you wanted to experience that beautiful colored journey, just like those people. However, the French Laundry is not going to be associated with unhealthy. It'll be associated with expensive and premium and very, very uppity. And the foods that they serve there are what would be widely considered are healthy. However, if we put colors into a processed food, it's instantly unhealthy and manipulative.
It's a bias because, for example, in our Napa County, where we currently reside, the whole culture is farm to table. And anything that is wrapped in plastic or belongs from outside of Napa is culturally frowned upon a lot of the times. So it is not the authentic Napa experience. There's that bias out there. And so, but at the same time, they use all the colors.
And just a personal anecdote of that, I used to work at the local Whole Foods here in the North Napa region, and I was a cheesemonger there. It's a wonderful job. Everybody should do it at least once in their life for 2 months or so. You get to eat all the cheese you want in the world. Anywho, to speak to the culture of Napa, we had one of our guests who would come up to the counter, would hand me a piece of cheese and tell me to unwrap it and then shave off like a millimeter off of all the edges of the cheese. And I asked her why, and she can claim that she can taste the plastic wrapping around the cheese, and then she would request that I wrap it in paper and give it back to her. Now, that was a little bit too much, in my opinion, but that does give you a insider perspective to an extreme of what most of Napa culture is like, farm to table wise.
Yeah, purist, man.
Purist. But look at us drinking our ultra-processed wines.
Yeah, most people are pretty chill back, but once in a while you get one of those.
Yeah, the majority of Napa, very chill people. Wonderful city to be in.
Yeah, and the reason, I mean, there's the plastic argument. Perhaps one day we can tackle the whole plastic debate as well. But yeah, I mean, I can see your concern. Just because you understand something doesn't mean you have to agree with them, or you have to think that they're right. If anything, you could say that I understand your argument completely, and you tell them what your argument is, and then after that you say, here's why I think it's wrong. And then if they continue to say, you don't understand anything, you can just tell them, well, actually I do understand, which is why I'm saying what I'm saying.
Right.
So, next up, what do you got?
Oh boy, they're hyper-palatable. What does hyper-palatable mean, Fahad?
Hyper-palatable, meaning that they're way too freaking tasty in very slang terms.
That's bad? Way tasty?
Yeah, way tasty is bad.
Oh, come on.
If you were to make a plot of health versus, like, on y-axis you have health, on x-axis you have taste, you will find that the more disgusting tasting the food is, the more healthy it will become in the nutrition world and health world.
Broccoli.
Yeah. Kale was supposed to be a decoration at home, which somehow now has evolved into a...
It used to be a garnish on plates at restaurants, and I remember clearly being a child, and I would always order the most expensive things on the menu instead of getting kid food items, and my dad would instruct me, well, you better eat all of that food because I'm paying for it. All your plate better be clean, boy. And so, yeah, I would eat all the meats and eat all the mashed potatoes, the gravy, whatever's on the plate. But then there was like this green stuff on the damn plate. And I would take a bite and it was incredibly bitter. And I would look at my parents and be like, oh my God, I have to eat this. And they said, eat the whole plate. My mom slapped it out of my hand. And she said, that's garnish. It was kale.
Yeah, man. I think that tasty and healthy should go hand in hand. It should always go hand in hand.
I think so. Yeah.
And if we cannot use the same things that we've evolved with, our perception of food, how we look at them and enjoy them. When we taste food, we like them because they feel good. It is how we are programmed, evolutionarily speaking. And there are plenty, I mean, when you say they're too tasty, you're basically saying that a certain cuisine is just gross because you just say that they're unhealthy or they're bad in some way. Like, for example, if somebody says the French cooking is too hyper-palatable because it's and too tasty, I mean, it's just makes literally no sense.
People will say that hyperpalatability is an issue because hyperpalatable will make this food addictive. Now, this is an issue, and this is from some personal observation in my own life. If I diversify my hyperpalatable foods, if I have a chocolate bar, if I have popcorn, chips, and ice cream, I'm going to eat every single one of those in one day. Probably not all of them at the same, not all of it, the whole tub of ice cream, not the whole bag of chips, but I will bounce back and forth between those things because they're very interesting. And then you are creating another re-interest because you're introducing something that's different tasting.
Novelty.
Go ahead. Yeah, novelty. This is huge.
Yeah.
Go ahead and try to eat the same exact thing over and over and over again, as we said earlier in the podcast. You get tired of it.
Yep. And this brings us to a very interesting concept that we've talked a few times on live streams, but we haven't really talked about it on the podcast. I don't remember, at least. And that one is dietary compensation. So even if you eat a large amount of food, whatever you want to call a large amount here, and you feel full longer for the rest of the day, and at the end of the day, even after eating a lot of food, you are still getting your results, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So there are some ways you can, I mean, the cotton candy example that you gave, like I said, it was very powerful in supporting this very same thing, that you ate a large amount of food, but it really didn't fill you up, period. No. But sometimes you can eat tiny amounts of food and they can be really filling as well because of how they interact with their digestive system, which is why certain foams can be used and have been used in the past for certain outcomes. And in bodybuilder verse universe, they use these kind of high protein foams as well for weight loss and different things. Now, you don't have to chug down foams all day long, but it just goes to show that it's just a proof in certain ways that it's not just about the amount or volume of food that you're eating. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, food should be ridiculously tasty and you should enjoy it and develop a good relationship with your food. That's the end goal. Next up, we got...
Oh boy, they mess up your satiety hormones.
Oh man,
this is a big one.
This is a very interesting one. And I did a deep dive on this topic as well. So here's what you guys need to know. And perhaps some of you scientifically minded can bring up some actually really good studies to kind of bust me down. Now, the general convention is that the satiety hormones get screwed up by your by different processed foods. Now, the problem is the big question here is, are these, I'm going to argue that the satiety hormones, are they even that influential? As in, are they even a good biomarker for when it comes to understanding whether a food is filling or not? Because whenever they try to isolate any of these satiety hormones and start doing studies on them, they get mixed results. PYY, CKK, any of these nerdy terms sound familiar to people, you start realizing, hang on, they really don't have a long-term impact when it comes to certain studies. So it's kind of like, when you look at iron ore, you abstract iron from it and test it out if iron is any good. So just like that, they've done studies on these individual satiety hormones, And I'm just not finding them convincing. Even the scientists would agree with that, who are doing studies on them, that it's a mixed bag of tricks. It's not reliable to use satiety hormones to gauge whether something is effective or not. And so if the thing you're using to track is wrong, like for example, if somebody says, I can't run, as in somebody says that 80 meters is a long distance. What if the meters are just messed up? They're not reliable way to measure. So that kind of screws up your entire observation, doesn't it? So that's the same thing with satiety hormones. That if your yardstick is messed up, it's not reliable, then you cannot make statements based on that yardstick. That's the problem with satiety hormones at this very moment. Perhaps people can talk me out of this, provide me evidence, but right now I'm not convinced. Short-term studies, perhaps, maybe, for a couple of hours. Maybe they see the brain light up or something. I'm not a super expert on this, but once you abstract it into human trials and certain isolated outcomes, the evidence is just not convincing or not there.
Right. One of the themes I see with science, and it's unfortunate, but people will point out these single mechanisms and then blame all of it on that thing. And it's just the fallacy of the human mind, and even the human body does this. In my yoga classes, I've witnessed this a lot. But people love to take the path of least resistance and get to the answer as fast as possible, which is why we see a lot of these myths that we've spoken of show up.
And this leads to another fallacy which many scientists and intellects fall into as well, that whatever they're researching must be the gospel.
Right.
And whatever model they're working on is going to be correct. So they'll spend lifetimes and years and decades on something like that. But then again, what's interesting is one of the strong proponents was one of the people who actually did the research. I watched this one video and looked at some of his papers as well. He did on satiety hormones at the end of a few decades down his career. He literally made that video kind of dismissing his own research, saying that we ended up falsifying it and the satiety hormones really don't have much to offer here. Now, this is a huge thing for people to hear because everybody's talking about the satiety hormones, but the evidence is just so unreliable at the moment, and you gotta convince before you actually start picking up the pitchforks. So these are some of the what we've covered is some of the major myths or some concerns, and though I do see where they're coming from, but we've provided people with ample evidence that why they are probably myths. So,
absolutely. And down in the comments section, if you guys have any more myths that need to be busted about processed foods, or if you have any things that we need to extract a little bit more later in the podcast, we'd love to hear more from you.
Bingo. So we recently watched this one video about this one guy on YouTube. It has like 2 million views on it. It goes in the lines of UK doctor switches to an 80% ultra processed food for 30 days. And man,
I would click that.
Yeah. It's such a convincing video. It's really not actually. But it's everybody's on this bandwagon, man. The whole ultra processed foods is bad, it's evil. And the guy literally walks into that video with his own bias. And it's kind of clear. Mm-hmm. And though he does bring up some important points and some observations can be made over here, but you also have to realize that, one person's anecdote really doesn't define the science. And there are so many confounders in his studies, and some of the outcomes they came up with, for example, the satiety hormones and addictiveness. We've already addressed some of that already. So I just thought that it was disingenuous to some extent. And though you're trying to point out the problem, I think that we should always, like I said, lead with questions rather than just using the lowest hanging fruit and create viral videos out of it. It takes courage to learn.
To that I agree. And it wasn't an honest experiment. Just right at the very start, you can clearly tell he was based, and what he wanted to do was show the worst part of processed foods possible. He didn't go in with a clear goal in mind of showing, not the clear goal, but the question of maybe can these foods be viable? Maybe.
Yep. And as consumers, you should hold these people accountable. You should ask them, okay, you've kind of figured out the problem, but what if we actually do want cheap, tasty, healthy, or more available foods? So what do you guys got for us?
Right.
And
in some ways, these people who do these extreme experiments are doing us a great service. They're showing us one extreme end of something, which is good. Taking Super Size Me, for example, that was a fantastic film. This guy who just goes out and eats McDonald's every single day, eats a certain caloric amount each and every day. But if you watch the video, the food that he eats from McDonald's is highly diversified. He doesn't focus on just French fries. So he's diversifying his diet the whole time, and that keeps things interesting for his palate, of course, and he's going to continue and work his way up to whatever gross amount of calories he was trying to consume. If he tried to do that just with milkshakes or just with fries alone, it wouldn't have worked out. And I observed the same thing in this UK doctor switches to ultra-processed diet for 30 days. He diversified his diet heavily, but it showed us how processed foods could go wrong. And instead of coming to the conclusion of, well, yeah, processed foods are bad, let's just throw it in the garbage. Screw that shit. Pardon the language. But what we need to look at is, okay, he showed us the way that you do it wrong. How can we do it right? What about that question?
yes, exactly. And these guys, like you said, they literally go on a buffet of diversified foods which have a negative connotation to them. And then they end up using the lowest hanging fruit to point a finger at them because it sells the most views and people agree with that. That's how it works. And it's a lot of it has to do with attention and bias in selling alternative products. So there's that aspect of it, which is, I mean, it's not bad per se. It's just all of it is misleading and counterproductive. So speaking of ultra processed diet, what people don't know is that yours truly has been on practically like a 99% ultra-processed food diet. I've been consuming air-fried chicken for a while.
As an outside observer, this is true.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Air-fried chicken. Air-fried chicken.
House smells like fried chicken.
Yep, air-fried chicken, some nuts, some chocolate, and some extra stuff. But mostly it's just air-fried chicken. And what's funny is that video with the UK doctor who went on an 80% diet, he was eating those.
First thing he ate was air fried chicken or just fried chicken.
Just fried chicken. Fried chicken. Yeah. I would be interested in knowing what the oil content in fried chicken versus air fried is. I think air fried is a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to use much less in the air fryer, which is nice. Very good.
Well, yeah, air fryer is something people should have. It's just cruel to deprive someone of that thing.
The air fryer is great because it's just it's a proof of concept that you can continue making really good ultra processed foods. And what the air fryer does, it allows us to strike away one of those issues that people have problems with processed foods, which is they have far too many oils in it. Well, bingo, we just improved our process. We have less oil in this thing. It's ultra tasty, and it tastes practically like chicken that was dunked in oil without having the grease all over your hands. Kind of nice.
Yeah. But man, holy moly, we've nearly kicked out 1.5 hours of the show, which is insane. We had a lot more we can talk about. Like, for example, one of the concepts we wanted to talk about was food structure and architecture. But I think that could be something we can cover on another podcast as well.
Right.
With some more science that I can acquire over time. And I think you also wanted to talk a little bit about the history of processed foods. You want to take a little dig, or do you want to just compile it into a different show?
I think we can kind of scoop it a little bit here, but I really want to flesh this out in another
go
show.
for it. I want to know what you have to say.
Yeah, so the history of processed foods. Let's talk about the basics of what food processing is. So cooking, salting, smoking, dehydrating, fermenting, pickling. These are very, very, very basic things of processed foods. And the goal of processed foods is to increase the longevity of the food and to help them from spoiling. And also to, in some cases, increase the bioavailability of food. And to understand the history of processed foods is super important because it does tie into the American industrialization, why we won World War II. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the next episode that we do touch on this on. And it's just having these foods that are just cheap, available, and tasty. That should be something to look forward to. We no longer have to band together. We no longer have to say, oh, I'm looking for a really good band of strong hunters so we can take down this mammoth tonight. We don't have to worry about that anymore. It's awesome. So it just becomes the unfortunate bit is that people's generalized conclusion about ultra processed foods is evil. And that just sucks because that's a regression in our progression. We're regressing back to stupidity, with lack of better words. We're not increasing our knowledge about foods. We're not increasing our knowledge about how to make better processed foods, which is what humans did for a very long time. And of course, in the next podcast, we'll do a deep dive into the history of processed foods and why that all ties in.
Yeah, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the industrialization as well. I have been recently reading this one book by Ian W. Toll, which is about the Pacific Front of World War II. It's a very fascinating, excellent book if you want to sort of do a deep dive beyond just Pearl Harbor and some of the events that are around it. It gives a decent amount of Japanese perspective on the war as well and the politics behind it. But you can obviously see that our country, United States, is built on the very fabrics of a nation that is willing to adapt. It's willing to grow. It wants to play nice. It wants to be good. We all want to be good, but it is not afraid to bring down the hammer once it has been provoked, which even then people are allowed to have the argument. We live in a beautiful country, I would say, despite what many people would say. And during World War II, one of the primary reasons why we were able to win the Pacific Front was industrialization. Now, there were other aspects of the war that we know are also important, like our code breakers were phenomenal, and eventually our technology outstripped them, which once again goes back to the whole industrialization of our country. And we supported all of that. But what are we doing right now is kind of tragic in a way. We were a country that pushed for science, for growth. Everybody gets to enjoy it. We fought for these values that we were going to create a dream, you know? And now what I see is we are regressing and promoting fear, especially in this food and nutrition sphere, where chemistry is being thought of as something to avoid. And all these additives are evil. All of these things, it's just tragic because we should be facing them head on. Understand what each and everything does and educate your family, friends, everybody around you. I think that's where the bigger picture is. I think it should be our major, if not an obligation, but a driving force to pursue a path of learning and not demonizing industrialization, especially industrialized food. Because if you think about it, think deep and hard about it, industrialization is a duplication of good science that just seems to work damn well. That is something you cannot deny. And so we should embrace it, and we should cultivate a better future. There are problems. We will continue to address them and highlight them with you guys, but we need to push forward.
And to that, I agree. It's a beautiful future ahead of time, as long as we are willing to grow and learn, to continue falsifying ourselves and seeking out just the better knowledge, essentially, and never stop learning. Don't get complacent in yourself. Just because you know exactly what a nickel does and what it pays for doesn't mean that the nickel can also be used to conduct electricity. That's a bad analogy, but you get the point. There's always a different side to things, and we should be willing to turn over every single rock.
Bingo. So I think, Corey, this is a good point to stop. And we've covered a lot of ground, but I think we've just touched the surface on many topics, like the history of processed foods, the type of processing. I from this point, I really want to start focusing on food science.
Right.
Like, what are emulsifiers? What are binders? What kind of things you can do to improve your food? What are flavoring agents? Like, we've shown people on this podcast that there's problems, but there's also solutions. So from now on, we're going to start focusing on solutions and education. Even if it has to be just you and me, I think we can lead the charge and educate the people so that they can use this knowledge to create better foods for themselves as well, while making their lives a lot easier for themselves and their loved ones. So this is where I think we can pause. And you got anything else?
There's nothing more to add other than that. So we can add another 2, 4, 5 hours of content. But we know that you have a busy life. You have time in your life that you need to spend on your family and friends and activities. And we have to send you a big thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast today.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And you can always go to ketogeek.com to sign up for our newsletter or marketing email. They're kind of like in the same thing now. And you can also purchase our product at ketogeek.com right now. Just remember that our ghee is coming back on this Thursday at July 1st. And a week from that, which is July 8th on Thursday, you will be getting access to our chocolate fudge energy pod as well. We're bringing the heat back. And if you're awesome, go subscribe to those things. Because actually subscribing to our product is really helpful because we're still a bit of a small business and it allows us to do our inventory better. It really helps us. So thank you so much, and everybody have a good day. Thank you for listening to the show. You can visit us at ketogeek.com to check out our premium keto-friendly and low-carb food products, including our infamous energy pods, made from the best ingredients we could find in the entire country. We also recommend signing up for our newsletter at ketogeek.com/signup, where you get exclusive discounts, rewards, product announcements, and the latest content we are working on. You also get a 10% discount on your entire order when you sign up. Go to ketogeek.com/signup to join the low-carb playground.